Welcome to Broadway Drumming 101. My guest today is Nate Patten. How are you?
Welcome to Broadway Drumming 101. I know literally nothing about drumming. What an honor to be here. You you may as well pick somebody off of the street to talk about drums, and they would know, I'm not kidding, about as much as I do.
The thing is, when I started this podcast, I had ideas that are seeming to come to life right now. I had thought about many months ago saying, you know what, I should interview other people than drummers. And I interviewed Mike Ahrens and we talked for 3 hours. And he's a contractor. And I was like, you know what? I should have something called the Conductors Camp, where I just talk to conductors and music directors about their perspectives.
Saw your interview with Mike in like 4 parts or something. I was like, now listen, no one's a bigger Mike Ahrens fan than me, but I was like, his interview is longer than Lord of the Rings. What did you talk about? You don't have to tell me, but it literally was hours with Mike Ahrens.
We went through the entire Broadway collective bargaining agreement line by line.
And that was just the first half of the podcast.
Exactly. That's part one. No, Mike Ahrens and I have known each other for decades, and we talked about a whole bunch of different things, but it's also just great to get different perspectives from people that aren't necessarily drummers, but are musicians that play in the pit just like we all do. You're working on a new show. What's that?
I'm working on the Broadway revival of Elf. So I guess it's technically not a new show, but it's a new production of a previously existing show.
And when was that originally put on Broadway?
First production was in 2010, I believe, like the fall of 2010. So it's been 14 years since it's on. And also, when it was on, it actually ran again, I think, in 2012. But because it's a Christmas show, it's limited. It was never intended to be open-ended. The number of people that have seen it on Broadway comparatively is actually small because it only runs 8 or 9 weeks in the fall. I know all of your fans are lining up as I say this.
And you are the music director.
Correct.
And how did you get involved in this production?
I've worked with Matthew Sklar, the composer. Our professional relationship goes back I think 17 years. I originally met him because I was on the first national tour of The Wedding Singer, and I was the associate music director of that in 2007. And then I became the music director of that. So that sort of began my professional collaboration with Matthew and Chad, who wrote the lyrics. Since then, not only have I gotten to know him really well, I've worked on his 2 other Broadway shows, the Prom. I was one of the conductors of the Prom, and then I actually worked on Elf on a touring production of it. It's not the same production as this one, but I've done the show before, but just a different production.
You've done several Broadway shows. What made you decide to get into musical theater in the first place?
Just an overall sense of despair and wanting to spiral my life into the ground. Because what other reason could there be? No, I don't know. It's a good question. I come from actually a number of generations back of Broadway actors and directors. No one in my immediate family, but 2, 3, maybe even 4 generations back, they were all actors and directors and in show business and worked on Broadway. So it's cliche to say, but it literally is in my DNA. So it's not completely. I always am shocked when somebody who grew up in Kansas all of a sudden comes and wants to be on Broadway. For me, it made sense. It was joining the family business in a certain way. But I always, looking back, seemed like I was going to go in that direction, I think. I didn't really feel like there were too many other choices.
So when you were a little kid, you saw a piano and you said, I want to play show tunes for a living?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. My grandma, Harriet, was a performer and a really good performer, and she definitely had cast albums in the house and played cast albums all the time. So I was very exposed to that kind of music from a really young age,
What was the
which
first
would
cast?
explain why I ended up gay.
Wait, so if you listen to a lot of cast albums, that's what happens?
It's absolutely what happened. It could turn anyone. Were you going to say what's the first cast album I listened to?
Yes.
Man, I honestly, I feel like I was hearing them like so early on. I probably couldn't even tell you. One that I remember vividly really early on was Chorus Line, actually. My grandma had it on 8-track, and I listened to Chorus Line and I remember just being intrigued by it. I also remember listening to my grandma she had the original Company cast album too. I remember hearing that as a young kid, and that one I remember feeling I was intrigued by that one because the music was weird. That's how I described it when I was 8 or 9. It was just like, oh, this is weird, and it was hard, and I couldn't get the melody like right away. Like it took me a minute to process it, and that was Stephen Sondheim. So I was really exposed to it. Yeah, I was doomed.
So were you not listening to pop music at the time? Whatever.
Honestly, I was. I
Okay.
I loved pop music as a kid too. Like I really liked all kinds of music. Like I loved the radio as a kid too. I was definitely very plugged into 80s music also. I
So
think I stopped in like 1997, and I'm still there culturally speaking, but I like the 80s and the 90s.
so why 1997? What happened then? Was something traumatic happen?
My radio broke. No, I feel I no, I don't know. I guess that was like not it's I'm not really it's not really 1997. I feel like that's the case for a lot of people. Like we tend to connect to music from our youth. I don't think that's specific to me. I think that's a human thing. Like the baby boomer generation listens to the 60s still. And I listen to Journey on the treadmill in 2024.
So if there was a chance where you can go on tour with Journey, or you could play on a show that would run for 10 years, and Journey was making in 1 year the same amount that you'd make on that Broadway show for 10, what would you do?
I would go on tour with Journey. First of all, that's never happening. No one's going to take me on tour with Journey, but that's why I want to say yes to that, because I may as well become an astronaut. You know what I mean?
Journey. Has anybody done a musical called Departure with the music of Journey?
The closest thing I can think of is Rock of Ages had some Journey music in it,
Okay.
but that should run for about 3 days.
Which one? Journey?
Journey musical.
I don't know. We'd have to think of a very good plot and a story.
It's got to be called "Don't Stop Believing."
Yes, just a small town girl,
Yes,
and she's living in a lonely world.
right.
Anyway,
Taken literally.
yes, exactly. That's how the whole. Anyway, let me stop. You grew up in New Jersey, listening to 80s music. You moved to New York to do what you're doing now. Did you go to school for music, and why did you go to that specific place?
I went to the University of Virginia, and I didn't major in music, but I did a lot of music and theater there. I actually majored in Spanish. Crazy. Some people frown on that. Like people in the business are like, "Oh, really? Didn't major in music? You hate that." But I studied music privately and was doing a lot of theater in the theater department at the university. I didn't want to go to a conservatory. I had the option, I think, to go to a few different conservatories, and I wanted like the old school, like college experience. that wasn't me locked in a practice room. And look, there were probably pros and cons to that, but I feel like I wanted to have like a normal. But that was
A-
just me.
And why Spanish and not French or Portuguese or
Well,
Lithuanian?
I was gonna do Lithuanian, but there was only one teacher. No, the reason honestly between for Spanish was that I took Spanish in high school and I liked it. I really liked placement class. I took the AP in college in high school and I did well on it. And when I got to college, I had tested out of 2 years of like introductory Spanish. So when I got there, they had, and I was like picking a major, they had said to me, they're like, if you take, they're like, you've already tested out of 2 years. So if you take one Spanish class per semester, you'll have a major in Spanish, just one class a semester. And I liked Spanish anyway. So I was like, why don't I do that? Because then it allowed me to pick my own curriculum and do other stuff. I went to UVA though, where the, the academics at UVA, I'm going to say it anyway, I had to take 4 semesters or something, like something really a lot for not being a science major. Like there were really pretty intense like academic requirements at UVA, none of which I remember.
Mm. Planetary science,
Yeah,
like
no, I was literally taking like crazy like astronomy and like all these. I remember being like, "What the hell am I doing?" Like I was like,
mm.
"I just want to go play on Broadway. I don't need to know what a
Uh,
constant."
So you graduated and you immediately
I
you have
did.
another.
I came right to New York as soon as I graduated, and it was in 2006. And I showed up with my luggage, and I said, "Hello, Broadway. I'm
They were
here."
like, they were like, who?
They were like, "Who the fuck is this?"
You
Know what they're
faced.
saying? They're saying that now at elf rehearsal on Monday.
So you came here and you wanted to do what you're doing now. When you got here, obviously you had probably been here before since you didn't live too far from New York City.
Sure.
Was it overwhelming to you, or was it something like, I got this, I'm going to take, find my way in?
Overwhelming to me to think about it now.
Mm,
I somehow just did it. Like when I think about what I actually did, which was showing up here with not really many connections, especially not having majored in music. Like I got here and was like, sure, I'll do it. Like the thought of doing that now, I'd be like, that seems really stupid and crazy. But at the time, I was like, okay. I think what you don't know is a good thing. I was fearless, I think, when I showed up. And now I'm looking back and I'm terrified that I did that. And I'm like, what was I thinking?
So what did you do in order to connect to people?
I started right when I got here. I remember my business card up on like at NYU and Juilliard and like schools here and putting my name up, being like, oh, if you need a pianist for classes. And they actually called from that. Like people like literally went to my card and yeah, come play for this class, which I did. I sent my name also to a bunch of the casting agencies in this and started, and they called me too and started doing like audition piano. And I met a lot of people through that. The other big thing was like I saw the national tour of Hairspray when I was a senior in college and wrote to the music director, rest in peace, named Jim Vukovic. Just such a great, you know, him guy. He's since passed away, I think, in the past couple of years. But I just him, and he was actually going to be the conductor of The Wedding Singer on Broadway. And I remember he said to me, keeping in touch, and I was like, I want to be a music director when I grow up. And he was like, well, keep in touch. And he literally said to me, you can come sit in the pit whenever you want. Just come and hang out. And it's not until I started doing this that I realized how completely generous that was.
Mm.
Oh, and I at the time I was like, oh, well, thanks so much. Now I'm thinking just to tell a young kid you can come any day. And I went and sat in that pit a bunch of times. The national tour was going out the next year, and Jim Vukovic wrote to me and was like, "Do you want me to get you an interview slash audition to go on this tour?" And I said, "Yes." And then I went and I interviewed and auditioned and got it.
Ah,
Probably because I had sat in the pit so many times, I like was ready to go. I was ready to suck. It was like in my bones somehow.
that was the first national tour of Hairspray?
The Wedding Singer.
Oh, The Wedding Singer,
Yeah,
okay.
I'd been on Hairspray, and that's when I like emailed.
So you got the job as the music director of The Wedding Singer?
I was the associate.
Okay.
I was totally not ready to be the music director, and I was the associate. And then when the music director left, like in the middle of the tour, and they moved me up to the MD, which is crazy. Like, that was another thing. I look at it now, and I was so not ready to do that, but somehow just again, what you don't know is a good thing.
How long were you out on tour with The Wedding Singer?
It was like a little over a year.
Okay.
It was great. I
Did you
still
like
I loved that show, and I loved the score.
did you like the touring experience?
I did. I really did. I don't think I could do it now. May because it's like somehow like in my like just this it's a grind touring. But when I was in my 20s, I was up for it and I loved it. No,
When you finished that tour, did you come back to New York and did you have
I
more connections?
I did. I toured for 4 years straight out of school.
Wow.
Things thing, and then like one led to another one where it was like somebody from that tour brought me to the next tour. But I did like 4 years of touring.
Okay.
Which I honestly I loved it and it was great and I learned so much on the road. I always tell people like go on the like out on the road is like where you can it's what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Like you can fuck some shit up on the road. Just go make all your mistakes out of New York. Go to Des Moines and do the wrong thing because you just that's where you learn how to do everything. So I think touring is a great experience. I recommend if you are able to tour, I recommend yeah. And also just for me, seeing the country was valuable. Like I'm from the East Coast. I grew up relatively close to New York City. It was very you learn a lot about I think not only the country but the whole world when you see how like I remember going to the Midwest and thinking, this is America. This is we like I grew up in New Jersey. Oh, I'm an American. I live and then I'm like, oh no, no, no. It's Ohio. I'm like, that's what America is. Now I'm like, we're in this like the outskirts of America, but I'm like, the country is like out in the middle of the country. Especially if you're from New York, it's easy to forget that we are the outliers here. We don't represent the body of people as a whole.
What was your favorite place or favorite city or favorite town to visit?
Oh God, that's a tough one. I really like Minneapolis for some.
Place I haven't been.
I just really like that. Likes everyone likes New Orleans. Those are we know those are fun. But Madison, Wisconsin, I didn't know what to expect, and it was like such a cool, great town. I guess also Santa Barbara, California was really
Mm. As a music director, what are the things that you look for if you get a chance to hire musicians?
I feel like I have a feeling, I'm not sure. I don't know who your listeners are, but like I have a feeling like your listeners are smart and I'm sure they're musicians. There's so many I feel like I don't want to say obvious, but like there's so many no-brainer answers to that, which I'm not gonna say. Obviously, like musicians that are talented, prepared, reliable, like those are like I feel like that's not really news to anybody. So I don't want to not and that's all completely true, and I do, but that sort of feels I don't need to tell your listeners that. Like we all know that's absolutely the case. There's some like givens. So besides all of the no-brainer answers like prepared and practices and can play different styles, when you're hiring a group of musicians or putting together a group of musicians, it's not necessarily like who is the best musician for each thing, but as much as who's going to be the best collective group of people together. Because I feel like you could have two musicians who are both amazing that may not be the right fit for one another, and that's okay. That doesn't necessarily mean that one is not good. I think a lot of music and putting together an orchestra or a band is like the chemical balance between the players in the room and figuring out what's going to be the best collective experience of musicians as opposed to you're the best this, you're the best that, and you're the best that. It's about who's going to really play well together. I would liken it almost, you could have two people who are both like amazing people that may not be friends. Like they may be awesome people, but it's like they don't really hang out. And in some ways, I think musicians are the same way, that it's about finding the inner dynamics of a group of musicians and the inner dynamics on a particular project too. Because I think different people are right for different things. And it doesn't mean that they're not genius at whatever they do, but they may not be right for a particular thing. I also tend to gravitate towards people that bring something to the table themselves. Like Jason Howland gave me a really great piece of advice years ago about music direction, where he was like, when you hire the right players, you don't have to do that much as a music director. And it's so true. But knowing who to put there is music direction, right? Knowing who needs to be in the room and who needs to be there, that's part of the job. So I like people who are going to bring something and you can say, oh, that's amazing. I love that. Keep that. And also a sense of humor is usually good. If you have no sense of humor, it like at all, it might be hard. Well, I mean, I'm not saying like the people like you. I'm not hiring a comedy troupe, like, but I do think 8 shows a week. Like you want to have people that roll with the pun, are easy and lighthearted in some way, because it's a tough. The 8-show week is hard. You've done it. We know it. You want to have people that show up with a sense
in the pit together.
We're also not wired to do the same thing 8 times a week in that way. Like it's very hard. Like we aren't really built for it. You have to make yourself built for it, right? I don't think that's a very difficult thing to do, which is the same show every day, but keep it spontaneous and fresh, but also not so much that you aren't consistent. It's like it's balancing that line of doing the same thing every night and being reliable, but also keeping it alive. It's an extraordinarily hard skill. And I think one that took me years to really develop. And also, I still am developing it, I think, on some level, about really walking that line between consistent and spontaneous.
Being on tour for 4, pretty much, you really can't take off when you're on tour.
No.
So you had to do those 8 shows and you had to do week in, week out. When you got done doing the touring thing, did you have something lined up in New York?
I started subbing for the first time when I got off the road.
What was the first show?
Catch Me If You Can.
Okay.
Mark Shaman and Scott Whitman. That was my first subbing. Yeah, that was after I had toured though for years. So
who were you subbing for?
Lon Hoyt.
Okay.
One of my favorites. Yeah,
and
he's amazing. I met him originally through Mark Shaman, who I knew from before that, who introduced me to Lon. Was the MD at Hairspray. And then I think Mark was just like, here, just meet Lon. But then I didn't sub on Hairspray because that was a little before my time. It was like years later that you know what? It was like, I don't know. It came from different directions because Mark had introduced me to Lon on Hairspray, but I didn't sub. Then I interviewed for a project with John McDaniel, the music director of Catch Me If You Can. And then he then put me into Lon. So it was, I had met Lon 2 different ways.
Okay. And you started subbing there. Did you sub at other shows? And what was the first show that eventually landed you with your own chair?
My own chair, I subbed a lot. And then the first time I ever was the chair, I think was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory about 7 years ago. I was the associate on that for only a few months because the supervisor from London, Nick Skillbeck, was conducting. And then I got hired as the associate, but we knew he was leaving, so I moved up to be the MD maybe after 3 months into the run. But that was, I remember it was, we knew that was going to happen because he was a Brit, so he went back.
Warren Oates was on that, correct?
He was he
Speaking,
ever?
speaking of a sense of humor.
And he's going to be on Elf with me.
Oh, really? Here's the thing. Speaking of that, Kenny Seymour generally hires me for things when there's an opportunity. I've worked with him since I met him in 2009 when we did Memphis and we did Ain't Too Proud and a bunch of other things. And hopefully we'll do this Soul Train thing if it ever comes in. Tom Kitt generally hires Damian Bassman. I worked for a brief time with Jason Robert Brown subbing because Jamie Eblin was away, and I did some work on the Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil for 3 or 4 guy. Seems like directors generally have their drummer that they work with, or few drummers. Why do you think that is, and what is it that you particularly like by the people that you generally have as your right hand?
Music directors tend to work with the same drummer a lot because it's such a special relationship. It's it's not that relationship requires a great deal of being in sync. And it's not something you find every day. It's and I think when you find that another person that you collaborate well with in that way, why would you not want to? It's hard to find it. So I think people hold on to it when they do. That's another one too. I think like the drummer MD relationship. I have a few drummers. You're one of them. There's lots of drummers I like working with, but I feel like the drummer conductor relationship is one that is it's specific to those people. Like you could have an amazing drummer and an amazing music director that should never work together. And that's okay. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean no one could be at fault in that situation. You might just be like, that's a terrible pairing. And then other people, and they would be great pairings with somebody else. It's like, it's the analogy I gave of like being friends with somebody. It's like, you could be two great people and you might be great friends, or you might just be great people that just aren't friends, and that's fine. It's the same with drummer MD. Like it's a unique relationship that requires a certain amount of balance.
When I interview some people on this podcast, and I write things for my site, I talk about and a lot of other about how you basically have to keep your eye on the conductor. And that's like the number one thing that drummers should know. They're playing at a pitch. You're always focusing right here on the conductor, looking at the conductor. And there are times, especially when I was doing this latest show with Cats, William would just over just to see if I'm paying attention at the same exact time every show. And I just made sure, because I already knew how the show went, but I just made sure I looked at him just to make him understand that I'm paying attention. And what is it about that is so important to you when you're looking out and do you want to make sure that everyone's paying attention to you, especially the drummer? Like, what's that relationship all
Yeah,
about?
the show's a living, breathing thing. It's a lot. This is a live medium. In every performance, obviously you want assistant. You're not going to go up there and do something crazy or something off the rails that's no one's ever seen. But it's a live event. You know what I mean? So you got to be checked into it and present. That doesn't mean you have to every minute be holding on and gripping and glued to the conductor, but you want to be aware that also things happen. The set piece doesn't come out. An actor misses an entrance. It's a live event, and You have to be tuned in to, yeah, I think it's not something that you can't, you have to resist going on autopilot because life,
When you have Warren Oates in the pit and he takes off and there's a sub drummer, what do you expect generally, and what should drummers know about what to expect from music?
I can tell you what I don't expect. I don't expect that that person comes in and is an AI replicated version of Warren Oates because I know that that's not possible. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to become another person. I would expect that obviously that they're prepared, that they know the show really, especially with drums. You got to know that show really well going in. But I would expect that they do their absolute best to recreate an experience that feels familiar to the rest of the pit. That it's that you do your best to sound like the person you're replacing. You're not going to be perfect. Yeah, like you want to feel like the show stays on its normal train track with the drummer being gone. That it just feels, everyone feels comfortable and at ease. But I don't expect it to be the complete same thing because it just can't. You're a different artist yourself. I I know not everybody would say the same answer. And some conductors would be like, I want it to be exactly what I hear every night. I am always fine with a sub bringing their own sense of artistry to what they're doing, provided that it doesn't throw me or doesn't throw off anyone in the pit. But yeah, but you're your own artist and you should bring your own artistry to subbing, but still do the show that sounds like what everyone else is expecting it to be.
Notes. When you give notes, are you really super detailed? Measure 132. Clayton, could you make sure that you hit the bell of the cymbal or the third inch from the edge of the cymbal because I need this thing here? Or like, how detailed are you and why is that important to you?
I think it depends on what it is. I think like sometimes a really small detail could be a bigger thing. It could be a tiny little thing for whatever reason they need it on stage, or an actor's depending on it, or it's a point. Who knows? I'd say in general, I tend to never give more than because I don't think you can. I think you should go into the next show with no more than three things. I don't give 10 notes. I think go in and unless they're like really pressing, but I, not. I would tend to give three at a time. And then I think also I don't note a mistake. I don't like when people do. If you just if your hand slips and hits the keyboard in the middle of the scene, you're not going to be like, in scene 6, your hand slipped and hit the keyboard. Like I've seen people give a note of something that is so obviously just an error. Like, or if somebody hits a wrong note, like I'm not going to give a note about that because they know. Like, they don't need to hear it from me. I would give a note about something that like they maybe didn't realize, or hey, here, you're thinking it's this, but it's this. I think a lot of notes will resolve themselves with some more time. That's in my experience. Just sometimes you just got to give people a few shows. Don't give 50 notes version because it's like by the second show, 25 of those notes will have already. That's my experience. I think you don't overload people with notes, but I think I tend to give a more general note and then a super super detailed thing only if it really affects something drastically or if it matters either to me or to somebody else in the production.
Going back to I the older that I get and the more experience that I get, I tend to look at the bigger picture from of things. When I saw Cats from the audience, I remember William telling me at this particular cymbal swell, could you bring it and make it more pronounced? I'm like, okay. So I did it. I'm like, why am I doing this cymbal swell so dramatically? But then I realized when I saw it from the audience, there was a lighting cue that went like that. And it It made perfect sense. There are reasons why it matters.
And that level of detail is important, right? But because that goes with a lighting cue. That's what I'm like. I would give that note because that's affecting the overall thing. Sometimes if it's a note that it's more about your own craziness, it's not always worth it. But that one matters because that's going to affect a bigger element than just what's happening on the drum set.
Have you gotten notes as a player before where you, no, I didn't make that mistake, or what are you talking about?
No, I've never, and any note I've gotten, I've deserved. And if anything, it was more like, I can't believe I didn't get a note about that. How
Mm.
did you not hear that? Uh, I, no, I've had a couple times like notes that, as I said before, like somebody like noted a mistake. I don't, whatever it was, like I was on the wrong patch or something. And they were like, you were on the wrong patch. And I was like, really? I was like, yes, I noticed that I was supposed to be a French horn sound and I was on a rocket noise. Thanks for reminding me. They heard it. I've had the privilege to work with a lot of really good MDs whose notes I appreciate. I think a great note, and I've gotten great notes, like Mark Shaman has given me like good notes that like Doug Besterman has given really good notes that like not only just fixed what needed to happen in the moment, but made me a better musician, I think. Just it's great to get a note from somebody who's really amazing, and then it's something that you can carry with you to the next thing, as opposed to one finite moment of that, like a general playing or conducting note in life that's really valuable.
There are times when I wonder, how the hell did you hear that? But after going through the rehearsal process and tech rehearsals and previews and shows, and then I come in as a sub, of course, how it's supposed to sound.
Right.
So when you're not getting that, you're like, okay, you need to play that symbol here.
And drums maybe more than anyone else is so the when backbones are so, you're really, the drummer's really in a hot seat in a different kind of way than if you're playing another chair. I don't know, keys one, bass, the rhythm section can be a pretty hot seat, but I think drums is like the most, in some ways, pivotal to the process.
Mark Shaman, Scott Whitman, Christian Chenoweth. What what are some of the craziest
I
experiences you've
can't,
had?
oh my God, I can't say any of them. The crazy, oh my God, I'm like crazy. I couldn't tell a single one. The craziest experiences,
Or most memorable experience? I put it like that.
being in an audition room with Mark and Scott together, hiring actors, is memorable because they're both geniuses, and hearing them fight over people was not, I don't mean fight. There was never anything, no fist fight, but hearing them not always agree, I found fascinating.
Mm.
Uh, I found because I respect their opinions each so much that like when they didn't agree, I was like, wait a minute, you don't agree? Like, who's right? I found that interesting. Um, Watching them work in a rehearsal room was always an amazing experience, and collaborate together. They're very like a yin and yang kind of situation as artists, and watching their process, I found absolutely amazing. And the way that they would come up with things together was very interesting. Kristen Chenoweth, I don't really have necessarily a story about Kristen Chenoweth as much as something that I have noticed Kristen Chenoweth. I think Kristen's very smart, and I've watched Kristen Chenoweth do something that I think is like truly like next level genius, which is that she has an ability to read an audience right away. And the minute she goes out on stage, she just looks like it's me, Kristen Chenoweth. Like, I'm just doing my thing. I'm cute, funny Kristen. But she's so acutely and sharply gauging that audience. and tailoring her act and who she and what she's doing in that moment to that specific crowd
Mm.
who is there in that moment that day at 8 p.m. Right. And I watched her do that. And I was like, that's genius. And it's why Kristen Chenoweth is somebody like she can play an evangelical church in Oklahoma or a gay bar in the West Village, and they like her at both. Who else do you know that could do that? No one. They
Mm.
don't like it either. But but Kristen Chenoweth, like, she can literally play to anyone, and it's because she very sharply like assesses the crowd's needs as an audience and delivers in that way. It's really genius.
What's the most difficult show that you worked on?
Difficult in
Difficult.
I think there's lots of different ways that something can be difficult musically. One that just jumps to mind immediately was, and I loved it, loved doing it, was the Prom on Broadway, conducting that. It was just like it was piano conductor, and it was just a lot of stuff, right? There was like a lot to do, a lot of time code. There was click, and you had to start the. And I remember being like, my foot. I was like, I don't want my foot to be doing something perfect. I was like, if something really matters, I want my hand to do it. But I truly loved every minute of it, and I was thrilled to be a part of that show. But that conductor book was just like, it was just like a beast. Like it was just a lot. It was a lot of playing, a lot of conducting, a lot of cues, a lot of things that had to go together. So that was very challenging. I loved the challenge of it, but that was hard.
In these shows now, I do notice that shows are becoming more and more complex, even with going back again, Cats. William had to start ULab and conduct and listen and watch the put his face forward for the camera.
Right.
This is another added layer, starting and stopping the click and making sure, oh my God.
It used to be that if you did something wrong, you hit a wrong chord. Now, if you do something wrong, Rum Tum Tugger gets hit with a piece of scenery. Like it's the way that we synced up the pit to the light cues and
Right.
we become like crew members to a certain. I'm not lamenting that necessarily because I think it's allowed the technology of today. It's allowed for a lot of innovative theater too. Like it's cool when you sync the music up with the set. Like that's awesome. So I appreciate that. We definitely added like layers of complexity to orchestra because the technology allows us to do that now. It's just I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily. It's just where we're at. It's just where it's technology meeting the art of theater.
Speaking of that, I was again at Cats. I would just keep bringing this up again because there was
it's always going to come back to Cats because like it opened in 1982 and you're today. It's literally called Now and Forever. And
cast members, I would talk to some of the band members and ask them about technology and AI. And this was at the time where Finale had just announced that they're not coming back, and you got to go to some other kind of music notation software. When it comes to Ableton and click tracks and different kind of keyboards that you have to use, so you're not only clicking something with your foot, you got to play and conduct and cue the actors and listen. Are you the kind of person who would want to delegate all that stuff to somebody else and just conduct, or do you like having to do all of this stuff?
I think the click, this is just me, not everybody agrees. This is my preference. I think the click should come from the conductor. And I think that because in theory, like the conductor sets the tempo traditionally. So therefore that's the tempo, it should come from the conductor. But again, if somebody wants to have the drummer start, absolutely go right ahead. Like you have every right to do that. That's just not how I prefer to do it. I like to be in charge of like I don't necessarily want to be in charge of the light board, but I think click I would prefer to start myself.
Do you like playing and conducting, like using your head, or do you prefer using the stick and conducting that way?
I've done both. Depends on the show. Like sometimes the show would be ridiculous to stick conduct.
Mm,
You know, what I mean? If you're doing like I don't know, like Grease or something, it's like that. I would want to play Grease. Like I wouldn't want to be standing up and conducting Grease. The Wedding Singer made sense to be piano conductor. It was like an '80s rock band like that didn't
mm.
stand and conduct. But like certain shows, like Elf, I'm glad I'm stick conducting, which I'm glad I am because that's not really a piano conductor show. It's like more of a like a big band swing show. So
Mm.
I prefer to be standing for that because it's just that's how those songs would have been conducted back in the day. So it depends on the material.
Now, the times that we've worked together, I haven't been in an orchestra. We've done other things where you've been playing piano. When somebody is conducting or when you're conducting, do you conduct to where the downbeat is where I should start playing, or are you the one that the everyone should come in halfway between the low point and the high point of the stick?
Yeah, no, it should be. I don't have enough experience like as an orchestral. I think the behind the beat is the Philharmonic.
Mm,
I'm from the old school theater where it's just play when the beat hits. I don't know. I feel like for theater music, again, we would have to get other conductors on here to fight about this. But for me, it's like play when the beat hits because if you're conducting in two, you're going to be in between those beats, and you're in a fast two.
mm,
Like
mm.
what? Like I mean, like
Yeah.
what could be more? But musical theater, there's a lot of like fast twos. I mean, like
Mm.
that's all over theater. So I'm thinking like you're gonna be in between those beats, and after the beat, I'm like, good luck keeping that together.
That makes sense. I didn't even think about it that way. I was talking to Isaac Hayward, and he was explaining about the whole orchestral way of conducting and how
Right.
with acoustic, if everybody's playing acoustic instruments and the the timpanist is way over here and the snare drum is over here, and so you had to get everybody together by having a certain way of doing it, and the sound would get to you in a certain distance, and it's all pretty
Mark
complex.
Mark Shaman told me a story where he a one of his film scores out in LA, like they were recording one of his scores, and the pianist for whatever reason just like, didn't show up. And Mark was like, Mark is a brilliant pianist. And Mark was like, I wrote it. I'll just go play. They didn't want to waste the time. He said, I'll just and Mark said he literally fired himself from the session because they were all playing after the beat. And he was just, I can't. He's like, I'm out. I can't do it. Because it was as a theater person, he was really thrown by that.
Mm.
Couldn't he it was literally it was his own score. But he was really rattled by the LA recording studio, this big string section. They were all like not with the conductor, even though they were after the beat. And he was like, thank you so much. I'm out. So
Fire yourself. Wow.
yeah, he fired himself because he was like, he goes, I'm just gonna because before someone else has to tell me to leave, I'm gonna get out of here.
So
But
you've
I get it though. That's a very I don't think I would know how to do that. If all of a sudden like everybody was like not with what I thought the conductor was, I'd be like, no.
mm. Yeah, it's a whole different approach. But you've conducted in big venues like the Kennedy Center and Madison Square Garden. How different is that? That obviously it's obviously much bigger. How do you approach those kind of venues as opposed to a Broadway pit?
I treat them the same. And I would treat it the same as if I was conducting a high school band. I,
Mm.
I think you treat the musicians the same. You may have different expectations. Obviously, if you're conducting the Kennedy Center Orchestra, you'll probably expect it to be better than a high school band. I can't pretend that's not true, but I think I would run the rehearsal the same. I really would. I would have a different viewpoint of what it was going to be, but I think if you treat everything like it's the Kennedy Center or the Philharmonic or wherever, like people rise up to their best wherever that may be. I don't know. I think I run a rehearsal the same no matter where it is. I really do.
What's the biggest thing that musicians should probably keep in mind to stay sharp when you have a long running show?
I think to look at a long running show as a work in progress. I think when you look at something as we opened and it's done, like I'm done. I'm done. We opened. Now I can do the show. We're done. That's when it will be hard. I think you have to look at it as you're continuously working on it and continuously trying to be better at it. Otherwise, I don't know how to keep it fresh if you're not,
Mm.
because you can only how much could you look at how many ways can you look at the same show 8 times a week for a year? But if you look at trying to be better at it, I think that's a way to keep it fresh. It's very hard to keep it fresh. I'm not gonna lie. I'd love to sit here and be like, that's what now it is very difficult to keep a show fresh over a long period of time. It takes an enormous amount of skill to do that.
Being a professional musician in New York is not easy. People want to graduate from high school or college and they want to come and be a show. You have a Broadway show, you have The Wedding Singer, you have The Prom, you have Ain't Too Proud, you have Jagged Little Pill, you have 99% of them, and they close. Those time periods in between shows, how do you deal with uncertainty?
Wow. Just keep pressing forward. Don't that's just for me. It's just when a show I remember actually I heard about Hal Prince, the great late director. He would on his opening, like the morning after his opening night of a show, he would he would like, open, say he opened on a Sunday, Monday morning, he would always have a production meeting scheduled for the next project.
Wow, really?
Just yeah, just a meeting. And I love that advice, and I love way of thinking that it's like whether his show is the biggest hit in the world, like you do the opening night and it's just the biggest hit ever, or if it's a huge disaster and the critics hate it, you just go to the next show, no matter either way. And I found that to be very reaffirming. I think to live in the uncertainty is just, you know, take it one day at a time. It's like nothing. Like, look at COVID. You don't really like, so you may as well just go moment to moment. It's much easier. To try to project too far down the line is futile, I think.
Damn, I'm all depressed now, man. I'm like,
I How do I live in the uncertainty? What was the other answer going to be? Xanax? That's the actual answer I wanted to give. Let me. Here's how to deal with it: weed gummies and a glass of Cabernet with dinner.
and a shot of whiskey. There you go.
There you go.
You've done talks to high school, I'm sure college kids too. If a young person, like I just talked about, grad schools, all I want to do is play drums in a Broadway pit. That's all I want to do in this little box by myself on the seventh floor of this theater in New York. That's all I want to do. What advice would you give them?
I think everybody's path is entirely different. There's not one way to do this. You don't need to model how anybody else did it. I think everyone has a different way in. I think meet as many people as you can. My advice would be meet people and don't expect anything from them. Just meet them and just get to know them. You know what I mean? I think also meeting other artists and being familiar with their work is essential. And a lot of young people don't do this. They're like, let me meet a drummer. I'm going to meet a drummer. I'm going to meet a flute player. I'm going to meet a pianist. And they're going to have no idea what that person does or did. They just want to meet them. But it's go with a sense of like genuine curiosity about what have they done? Let me listen to their cast albums. Let me and have engage in conversations with people in the business about their own work. That's how I really met people is just like asking questions, being like, what was it like to do that? And like, what was that experience like? Being genuinely curious. I think you have to go in and be curious about them as opposed to being like, what can this person get me at some point? It's more about you hearing about their experience. For um, also, I don't know. I think this is something that you don't like when you're just starting out. Take everything. Like asked, and they did. Like somebody asked me to play the piano in Port Authority bathroom, and I'd be like, all right, because at least like, I was taking literally everything. I think kids are coming into the city today being like, I don't want to do this. Be willing to just, if you really want to do this, I think you have to be willing to right at when you're starting. I don't think you have to take everything your whole life, but when you're just coming in with no experience, take everything. That's just me.
Agree. I tend to agree.
Generational. This generation, unfortunately, a lot of, not all of them, but a lot of people, they want to go right to Broadway. I didn't go to Broadway for years. I didn't sub until I had been in the business for 4 or 5 years. I didn't set foot in a Broadway pit until I had been there for 5 years.
Here's the thing. Why should they wait when all the opportunities are on Broadway? It's like, why am I going out and playing at these stupid gigs at Green 42, whatever that place is? I want to play on the next big hit that's gonna run for 20 years.
Because Broadway is not where you start. Like it shouldn't be a training ground and it shouldn't be the first thing you do. That's changing a little bit now where you're like, I'm coming right to Broadway. Is there a room for somebody who's like truly a prodigy and an absolute musical genius at 22? Absolutely. Because those people do exist and they're extraordinary and they're amazing and bring them right to Broadway. Like if you can hack it at 22, great. But most people, even really talented ones, need some time cooking. They need just to get acclimated into the scene. And as I said, make mistakes elsewhere.
Mm.
Go do a show, Maine, and just learn it there. Like by the time I did anything on Broadway at all as a sub, I had a great deal. I had 4 years touring experience. I had a lot of, not a lot, but enough experience. And then by the time I had a chair on Broadway, I had like a decade of show business experience. So I didn't walk into Broadway being like, what is it? It just felt like another.
Speaking of the next gig, you're starting your next show, which is called El. I need to come see it.
Oh, you see it. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. Playing at the Marriott Marquis.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes. Opening first preview November 9th.
And when it ended? Or
It's a Christmas show. So
that's right. That's right.
It runs through, it closes like it's like maybe like 72 performances or something around that, maybe a little less.
And who's playing Elf?
Gray Henson.
Okay.
Such a wonderful young actor. He's going to be so funny. He's great. He was in Mean Girls and he was in Shucked. Marvelous. Totally.
Yeah, I gotta watch the movie again. That was hilarious. Will
Oh,
Will Ferrell, right?
yes.
Yeah. Oh my God.
It's so funny and so heartfelt, and it's just beautiful. It's really become a Christmas classic. Well liked.
You think that'll come back every year?
Well, it could be better. It'll depend, of course, on how we do this year. Knock on wood. So they'll see, but it's the kind of show that could come back whenever. I hope.
Good. It was great talking to you. And how can people find you on the interwebs?
Okay, my Instagram is at Nate Patten, and I'm on Facebook, Nate Patten, and my website, natepatten.com.
Now we're talking very simple, to the point.
What call it?
The Nate Patten, Nate Patten,
Crazy Psycho Music Director 5 at G.
buddy.
Well,
Well, that's your TikTok.
I'm not on TikTok.
Oh, really?
No, I can't. I just can't. I waste enough time as it is. I know if I go, think I'm on TikTok. Do I win? That is such a drug. I can see that it's a drug, and I don't want to take the first hit on the crack pipe. You know, I mean, I don't want to do that.
I hear you. No Snapchat, no MySpace.
No, MySpace. That I have.
Bringing it back to your
MySpace. I've got a great song playing on the page.
Yes, it's called "Please Don't Stop Believing."
I was just gonna say that we brought it full circle. Good night, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
I will talk to you soon, Nate.
Yes, you